Motionless in White is a weird enigma. They emerged at a time where metalcore was really pushing into the mainstream, with the likes of Killswitch Engage and Bullet for My Valentine leading the way, while emo legends My Chemical Romance had just dropped the legendary 3 Cheers for Sweet Revenge. So adding in a group of pale-faced kids that looked like the birthchild of Marilyn Manson and the cast of the Twilight Saga was a shock to the system. But their look wasn't the only unique thing about Motionless in White. They were one of the first bands to bring heavy metal riffs combined with eerie industrial atmospheres into the mainstream. And that's not just my opinion. Even alternative press labelled them America's premier industry metal gothcore outfit. In the present day, it's hard to miss the chalk white face paint and cybergoth aesthetic the band has now trademarked. And while many people mistakenly label them as a product of overnight success, Motionless in White is anything but that. How did a bunch of misfits from a small town in Pennsylvania build such a cult-like following and break into the mainstream eye? Well, in this video, we're going to dive into exactly that, as we break down the mysterious rise of Motionless in White. To fully understand Motionless in White's journey, we have to go way back to the mid-2000s alternative scene, a time when MySpace musicians were at their peak and Warped Tour was a rite of passage. 2005 was a unique time. On the one hand, you had metalheads listening to the likes of Bullet and Killswitch Engage, and the emo kids were busy listening to Evanescence and MCR. And this is where Motionless in White saw a gap in the market. After being inspired by bands such as Slipknot and Rob Zombie, they managed to perfectly blend the two genres into their own unique style. Around this time, a group of young lads from Scranton, PA, who were still in high school at the time, decided to make the band we all know and love as Motionless in White. And what makes this even more impressive is coming from such an isolated music scene, no more for the likes of The Office, which is quite far removed from the boys themselves. Being so isolated meant that the band had to be creative, getting their sound out to the masses, which is where MySpace came in clutch, with Chris even quoting that was all the band had besides handing out flyers back in the day. A big part of the fans' connection to the band was this level of isolation though, as a shit ton of angsty teens and young adults felt equally unseen in their hometowns. And with these hilarious photos and rough demo tracks posted online, the band was ready to take over the alternative scene, one MySpace page at a time. But where did this passion to use music as an outlet come from? Well, for Chris specifically, it seemed to have been years of torment and bullying during high school for being different. As I'm sure you can imagine, back in the early 2000s, people weren't exactly the kindest to people walking around in black band tees and eyeliner. And Chris felt the backlash from this, going on to describe how the same people who gave him shit were his best friend just years before. But due to the change in his alternative style, the same former pals turned into bullies. But rather than fold to the hate, Chris found a few fellow misfits and channeled all of that energy into their music. With the members sorted, the band then started cycling through names, with the likes of One Way Ticket and When Breathing Stops being considered, but it wasn't until New Year's Day of 2005 that they settled on the now iconic Motionless in White, which was inspired by an 18 Vision song, a metalcore band that they idolized. This group of misfits spent every hour working together, even to the point that nearly all of the band members worked the same job at their local PacSun, saving every penny to reinvest back into the project. And come Friday night, off came the work uniform and on came the white face paint, as they hustled to try and fight for a spot at any local show that would take them. But that was the problem, because they were so different, it was hard for the guys to get promoters to take them seriously, even to the point where Chris had to literally beg a local promoter by calling him every day for a month, until they finally landed a spot on a show with a post-hardcore band, Senses Fail. But the band's persistence paid off, as after working their asses off grinding on the local circuit, slowly but surely, the Scranton Misfits attracted a local following of kids who felt like they finally had a band that was representing them. But hard work wasn't the only thing that led to Motionless's success in the early years. The band were extremely savvy, and even early on, they recognized the importance of social media, with Chris quoting that other than handing out flyers, MySpace was all that they really had to rely on promoting themselves back in the day. And it paid off, as by mid-2000s, their online presence was reaching fellow misfits way beyond Scranton's borders, and new fans started discovering Motionless in White online and trading burned CDs of the band's scrappy early EPs. And that EP in question was the self-release The Horror, which dropped in 2007, and shortly after touring that EP, their break came when they earned a spot on the 2007 and 2008 Warped Tour. Yes, it wasn't the main stage and they were playing in dusty parking lots, but it got their name out alongside popular acts in the scene at the time. And the grind continued. Each tour won Motionless in White invite a few more fans. Kids who saw these pale-faced guys giving fucking everything on stage, and it wasn't just the fans who saw the potential. As fast forward to 2008, and Fearless Records came knocking on the door offering a deal, announcing that they had added Motionless in White to their talent roster. Their hustling on MySpace landed them a deal on a legit label, setting the stage for their first full-length album, and come fall 2010, everything finally started to click into place. Motionless dropped Creatures, their debut album, and it was the perfect representation of the band at the time, equal parts brutal and beautiful, and dedicated to the fans who had gotten them this far. I mean, nothing shows that more than the fact that the band asked fans to submit their own lyrics, with many of them making it into the album's title track. But the debut album wasn't just a gimmick, it was a solid piece of work, especially for a debut, with the lead single Abigail pairing chugging riffs with a tale of Salem witch hysteria, complete with guest vocals from Nick Brooks of It Dies Today. An Immaculate Misconception came loaded with a music video that featured Twisted Sister's Dee Snider as a guest star, which almost symbolized the passing of the torch. One music critic at the time even labeled the listening experience as a feeling as if we were inside a haunted house, but hidden within the theatrics were songs about heartbreak, isolation and anger that further made a bond to those fans that grew up with the band. But this album reached way further than their own following, as Creatures even broke into the top 20 hard rock albums chart, an insane feat for a debut, and the numbers transferred directly over to real life, as the same shows Motionless were opening for, a few months later they were headlining. The stage was set for success, but the bar was raised even higher, setting a shit ton of pressure on the band to perform with their next album. And while we know pressure can create diamonds, it can also cause cracks, which is the case for the next storyline of Motionless's career. A relentless touring schedule and the pressures of young adulthood began to take their toll on the band, which was shown when childhood friend and drummer Angelo left Motionless in White in 2013 due to personal reasons. But this wasn't the first band member departure, as around 2011, bassist TJ Bell had silently left the group, along with others coming and going. With uncertainty surrounding the band and the pressures of following up their debut album, Chris and the band had a decision to make. Do they ride on the coattails of Creatures, or do they continue evolving their sound? The band decided on the latter, which was a tough decision to make as the fans wanted the music that they knew and loved, while the band members themselves were growing tired of the same sound. This led Motionless in White to make some drastic changes, which Chris believed pissed off quite a lot of their loyal fans early in their career. This period between 2011 and 2013 felt like a shitstorm for Motionless. Members leaving, their musical direction was up in the air, and the same fanbase that was so dedicated early on in their years were now heavily divided. The stress and pressure was real, and this could not have shown more than in their next album, 2012's Infamous. Before this album was even officially released, it was causing a shit ton of controversy online, when the album was leaked a month early and fans were brutal with their opinions. This wasn't the Motionless in White they knew and loved, and some felt like they were drifting way too far from their early metalcore roots. In fairness though, Chris had been extremely vocal about wanting to go out of his comfort zone, even going as far to say that the metalcore genre had become repetitive, monotonous bullshit, and that Infamous was their way of breaking out of the genre, and let's just say it definitely was different. The album had mixed the sounds of Korn, Cradle of Filth, Nine Inch Nails and Linkin Park all into one mutant creation, and this creation was getting met with extremely mixed feedback. In trying to reach a new fanbase, the band inadvertently pushed away their most loyal supporters, with one reviewer summing it up perfectly by saying 2012's Infamous alienated some of their longtime supporters that felt it veered too drastically from the band's metalcore roots. And Chris and the band felt the pressure of trying out a new sound, as he told reporters that while he didn't feel Infamous was an insanely drastic change, some fans thought it was traumatic, and dealing with that reaction was the hardest challenge for the band. Now, don't get me wrong, objectively, the album received a ton of praise from the critics, with the likes of Alternative Press giving the album a perfect score of 5, and in contrast, Kerrang gave it a 4 out of 5. So it's not like it was a bad album by any means. Still, the transition put a whole new level of pressure on the lads, and for some it was all too much, as with the band members rotating in and out, soon enough it was just Chris that was the only remaining founding member. This was a rock bottom point for Motionless in White. They were battling an identity crisis, band members were leaving, and their most loyal fans were turning their backs on them, all while objectively the band was releasing some of their best music to date. But looking back, this really was the catalyst for the rise of the band, as some incredible things were just around the corner. Fast forward to 2014, and the band released the perfectly titled Reincarnate, as after going through the dark period with Infamous, the band's love for music was almost born again, and it showed instantly with this release. I mean, even with the album's self-titled track, the meaning behind it was about shedding your skin and rising again, a not so subtle nod towards the band's rebirth. This really was a peak for Motionless in White. The fan reception was incredible, and to go with that, Reincarnate debuted at number 9 on the Billboard 200, a first-time entry into the top 10 for the band, and a significant jump ahead of any of their previous album positions. The band really started to blossom, with the now beloved Vinny joining Motionless during this album cycle, and Chris really started to fully embrace his now iconic aesthetic on stage. Looking back now, Reincarnate really was the album that solidified Motionless in White's identity for years to come, with Chris being extremely proud of how the band rode the wave, saying, "Reincarnate was a course correction, showcasing that by going through the shitstorm that the fans threw at them, instead of bowing down, they adapted and emerged even stronger as a unit." Motionless in White went from your stereotypical MySpace scene band to a recognised force on the global metal stage. And speaking of global metal stages, I don't think that even they could predict that what a decade's worth of grinding would lead to next. By the late 2010s, the band that once begged for opening slots was headlining their own international tours. They had toured across North America, Europe, Asia, and were supporting some of the biggest names in rock and metal on a global stage. The band spent most of 2016 and 17 opening arena tours for the likes of Slipknot, Korn, and Breaking Benjamin, but one of the standout moments from that era had to be their set at Germany's Rock Am Festival in 2017, with the band playing to a huge crowd with all of their branding and their aesthetic nailed down. No longer confined to the Warped Tour circuits, the band was now playing on some of metal's biggest stages and absolutely fucking killing it. And just to top off a stellar 2017, Motionless dropped Graveyard Shift, their 4th studio album and their first on the powerhouse label Roadrunner Records, with the feature from their fellow tourmate Jonathan Davis of Korn on the track Necessary Evil. Now, I'm going to skip ahead a bit here, 1 because there's so much information, and 2 because I want to try and keep my sanity when editing this video, but the explosion in popularity between Graveyard Shift and Scoring the End of the World was fucking insane. Motionless in White continued to grow both musically and professionally, finally finding their identity, but more importantly, finding their niche and audience within that. They dropped another 2 albums within short proximity of each other, releasing Disguise in 2019 and Scoring the End of the World in 2022, and each album expanded their sound and their fanbase even further, and gave us one of the greatest bangers in recent history with my personal fave track Slaughterhouse. Songs began finding homes in video games, and with the explosion of TikTok, their sounds went viral, leading to headlining major festivals alongside the stereotypical legacy acts. During that period, the band was relatively drama-free, despite longtime bassist Devon being replaced by Justin Morrow, but the band kept chugging away, and after close to a decade, they finally reached their peak. And you know you've reached that when the pissy haters are in the comments being jealous of the overnight success. But the scrappy kids from Scranton had finally made it. The band's growing success and relentless touring led to some unexpected calls, with one of those being from the WWE. Or you may know them as the WWF if you're old as dust like me. Turns out the band's signature sound was a perfect match for the spectacle of wrestling, and one wrestling figure in particular, a WWE superstar known as Rhea Ripley, who just so happened to be a Motionless in White fan way before she got her break into the mainstream eye. Now, for those that don't know, Rhea Ripley is a bit of an icon, and she's a gothic powerhouse of the WWE, known for her dark, metal-inspired persona, and she even had parts of her look heavily inspired by Chris himself. So, in 2022, when Rhea needed a new entrance song to fit her heel turn, the WWE commissioned the band to create a song called Demon in Your Dreams, with Chris's vocals being at the forefront of one of the WWE's biggest superstars. And this partnership led to an absolutely insane moment at WrestleMania 40 in 2024. For those that don't know, WrestleMania is essentially like the Super Bowl of wrestling, a huge event with tens of thousands in attendance and millions watching at home. And on night 1 of WrestleMania 40 in Philadelphia, Ripley was set to defend her title in the opening match, and Motionless in White was right there to perform her entrance live on the grandest stage of them all, with the stadium lights dimming and Motionless performing to the largest crowd of their career. For Motionless in White, WrestleMania was more than just a sick moment. It was symbolic of their crossover into the true mainstream eye. Hardly fucking any metalcore bands can say they performed at WrestleMania, and that's an achievement in its own right. Motionless in White had truly conquered the global stage, earned respect from their peers, and were now making noise in pop culture as a whole. So hopefully now, despite what you've seen on TikTok, you'll realise that Motionless in White's overnight success is anything but that. After 20 years of grinding, they're now finally getting the respect that they deserve. And with a new album around the corner, it doesn't look like they're slowing down anytime soon. But while we're waiting for that, if you enjoyed this origin story, hit that subscribe button and why not check out this video.